Okay, so hello. My name's Derek Dearden. I've been running my own businesses in one form or another since 1975, and I'm here today with Ben Hunt. And I'm very excited because he's just written a book, and I've been thinking of writing a book around about this subject for the last 5 years, and he's said everything that I would have possibly wanted to say and much more, and he said it brilliantly. And there's a lot that resonates about his background and the things he's been through that totally resonate with my experiences as well. And the context for this, obviously, we're recording this on the 10th of April, and we've had 3 or 4 weeks of hysterical chatter and confusion about the fact that there's apparently a deadly pandemic sweeping the world, and without quarrelling at all with the fact that there is a novel virus making the rounds, it is extremely unpleasant. My own estimation from all the investigation that I've managed to do is that a great deal about it is somewhat exaggerated, and the response of governments has been disproportionate, shall we say. But by the time you see this, you'll be forming your own opinions. The material in Ben's book would have been relevant at any time, certainly in the last 10 years, and in a way I wish there was a book like this when I started trying to run a business in 1975. But of course the book by itself wouldn't have been in the same form in 1975, because there's a whole lot of advantages that you've got if you're trying to create your own enterprise in 2020 compared with 1975. I mean, for instance, in 1975, there was no internet, or at least no publicly accessible internet. There was no way that you as an individual could readily set up online payments or charge people's credit cards. Now you can set that up in a day. And when that first became available to people like yourselves, it cost you quite a lot of money every month before you'd even made any charges, whereas now it's just very plain sailing and very low overhead. There was very little in the way of affordable, efficient, rapid courier deliveries in 1975, which we now will take for granted that you can usually get 24-hour or 48-hour delivery without any difficulty. There was very little information on how to run a business at all, in any way, shape or form, for the average person. There was anybody who was trying to work from home was at an enormous disadvantage. You simply weren't being taken seriously. I mean, I remember I was building electronics in some of those early enterprises, and we had reps coming around from the supply companies, and if they found that you hadn't got something that looked like their image of a business with a name over the door, they'd probably shut down your account. The trouble with most business education is that they do one of 2 things. They either give you a totally overblown expectation of what's possible, or they try and offer you a sort of one-size-fits-all template. And the great thing about Ben's book is it's about you creating something which is unique to you, which you can be enthusiastic about, which fits your interests, your talents, your aptitudes, your experience, and allows you to be a contribution. So I think that's all I'd like to say by way of an introduction. And I'd like to say a bit more about the book later, but perhaps I'd like to let Ben say a bit in response to that.
Thanks, Derek. So I'll give a little potted background of myself, and what's brought me to this point, because I think our stories are very. Each person's story is extremely important to whatever you do, and I think it's important not to ignore the journey that's brought us to this point, because it informs who we are and everything like that. So similar to you, I didn't have such a smooth time through university. I did 4 different courses at 3 different universities, because I was basically interested in everything. I love maths and languages and English and art as well. So yeah. So I went off the rails a little bit in my 6th form and came out with 2 A's, a C and a D, and I got a D in art at A level. So I decided to go off and do art, obviously, instead of the things that I was really good at. Started doing that, messed around, 4 different courses, 3 different unis, eventually came out with a degree in combined studies, which means nothing at all. But that was around 1994 when I graduated, so a little bit later than you did. And the web had just burst onto the scene. So, Google existed and Amazon were just coming out. And I got drawn into web design because it had this great combination of problem solving, maths, programming, and visual design, and the kind of psychology side as well. So I started doing that, started doing 3D graphics and stuff like that. I was still doing database programming and stuff on the side. And then, just followed a long and winding road, doing various things in web design. I joined FreeServe in 1999, which was the first free internet service provider in the UK. So I saw the bubble burst from a great vantage point. I think FreeServe had a IPO that raised $3.4 billion or something ridiculous like that, and never made a penny in profit in its existence. Yeah, so that was the height of that particular insanity. And now we've got another one going on. This global shutdown, all to do with a supposed pathogenic virus. So, one thing we can all agree on is that the crisis itself is real. So, the book's been something that's been brewing for several years. I've always been really fascinated with the power of content and how really, really well made content can reach millions of people. And like you, Derek, I think I wish I'd had this book a few years ago, because in about 2006 I wrote a tutorial or an article for my website, which at the time was called Web Design from Scratch. So I was doing a long-term consulting job in Liverpool, which meant I spent an hour and a half on the train going there and an hour and a half coming back every day. And so I quickly got bored of Sudoku. And so I pulled my laptop out and started writing articles about web design. And why did you put things here? And how should you arrange things on the page and to make it work? Because my mum had taught me something about the visual language of Old Masters paintings when I was a boy, just to entertain me, really. And so I'd kind of got the germ of the idea that visual design and art had a language that you could decode, and I guess I just applied that as I worked as a web designer, professional web designer. So anyway, I started writing articles. I was getting a few thousand visits a day to my website, and then I wrote one in 2006 called Current Style in Web Design, which took me a day to write while I was on my contract in Liverpool, because I was starting to see there seemed to be a kind of a dominant style coming through at the time that was a bit different and unique from what had gone in the previous 10 years. And so I wanted to kind of just do a summary of like the 10 main design features that I was seeing a lot more and explain why they worked. So I wrote this article, and then a few weeks later, I started noticing that there was an awful lot more traffic coming to my website. And I looked at my analytics, and loads and loads of people, thousands and thousands of people a day, were coming to my website after searching for the term Web 2.0 design. And I'd never heard of Web 2.0 as a term. It wasn't mentioned in the article itself. And yet, lo and behold, my current style in web design article was ranking at the top of Google for the term Web 2.0 design. So what had happened there is I had inadvertently caught a wave, and quite a big wave, you know. Now, if I had known what I know now, if I'd figured it out, but you know, this wasn't to happen until later, then I could have capitalized on that, and I could have built an information business very, very easily. All I needed to do was to create a course in Web 2.0 design, and maybe, you know, membership group, which even back then I could have done in a week, and I'd have been away. But as it was, I was still spinning plates. I was still doing my UI design contract in Liverpool, still trying to run a web design company in my spare time, and just always with fingers in different projects and trying to write software and stuff like that as well. So I think I split myself very thin over that time. And what I realize now is that if you want to really go global with something and really make your business about it, you need to focus on one particular thing that you can say, that's mine. If I'd have been, I was in a position to really be, you know, the world authority on visual design for the web. So, and you and I met a few years later, I think 2009.
Yeah.
I'd written a book called Save the Pixel, which was my first book, which was about simplicity in web design.
Yeah.
And that got
making use of every bit of the available screen to move the conversation forward that you were intending the customer to get, which is probably, you know, one of those ideas which has been so kind of successful that it's now a commonplace. But the point is, it wasn't a commonplace before you started pointing it out.
Yeah. And it was great. I mean, that book actually started out, and this is something else that's really interesting, because that book started out, it was going to be called 50 Homepage Redesigns.
Yes.
And so what I did was I got people to say, to submit their homepages, yep. And then I was going to do a redesign on each one and explain why I'd made particular changes or design decisions. And what happened was, as I was going through that, I realized that my ideas started to crystallize. Because what I was doing, I was taking the kind of innate process that I used subconsciously, and I made it conscious. And when you do that, it kind of crystallizes your ideas, and then you can advance and step on those ideas and work your way up. So the book was really successful. It probably made, you know, $250,000 in sales over a few years just from my website as a PDF. And then Ken McCarthy picked it up. Ken, obviously, the A&R guy of internet marketing, who'd run the first.
Yeah. Hey, had you had any contact with Ken prior to that?
No, the first contact was Ken contacted me and said, "Hey Ben, I've read your book. I think it's great. I'm running a seminar at Heathrow in a few months. Will you come and present?" Yeah,
and I was the production manager at the back of the room there.
That's right.
And it was funny because I spoke to Bettina beforehand, and she said, "Oh, we've got Drayton Bird and Ben Hunt." And my reaction was, "Who are they?" I didn't even know Drayton, much less you.
Yeah.
But
it was a real,
it was interesting that, you know, somehow in her and Ken's world, that you were worth mentioning in the same breath.
yeah. So, and that was a real eye opener, that event. You know, I can remember it like it was yesterday, and it was 11 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, being there
Well,
for
it's extraordinary, you know, that really you were there as one of the experts,
Yeah.
and you learned masses from every single other presenter there, as well as like an overarching vision of business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the big things that I came away with from that event was first the realization that web design is marketing,
Yeah.
is part of marketing, because a lot of us were laboring under the illusion that it was a purely creative thing, and it was aesthetically driven, and, you know, it was just a, you know, big kind of pissing contest for designers to see who could make it look the sexiest. But, you know, I was already...
Well, there's still a lot of that.
There's still too much of that, yeah. But, you know, it really, you know, propelled me down that road. And then the other thing that I realised was because Drayton was coming up with these like A and B tests for the crowd, you know, and the audience there were maybe about 60 of us in the room, and he was saying, you know, do you think A was more successful or B? And we got it about half right. We might as well be flipping coins, you know.
Yeah, and this was not
people.
a bunch of dummies. This was 60, and I should think probably 50 out of those 60 were kind of pretty much top grade, highly experienced marketers.
Yeah, yeah.
And they still couldn't do better on average than a coin flick.
No, absolutely. And so that was the second thing, is that, you know, if web design is marketing, then as Drayton revealed to me, because I'd never heard of split testing,
Really?
that you could measure its effectiveness, you know, and you could improve it, you know, which was really mind blowing at the time. So I then went off and we did it again the following year, and that year conversion rate optimization was the hot topic.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and I went away determined that I was going to try and crack the code of visual design for the web within that scope. You know, what worked, what didn't. And I went off and wrote a book. Took me a couple of attempts. That came out. That was called Convert. That was published by Wiley in 2011. And I guess I'm still trying to do the same thing, but I've moved away from web design because it's kind of like the process over the years of kind of peeling away at what doesn't really appeal to you. And there's been lots of things that I've come up against in marketing and business that I found unappealing. So I'm not into shortcuts. I'm not into hacks. And I'm also convinced that, you know, what a lot of people in the marketing information sector sell is very often like, this is what worked 12 months ago, and I'm going to sell a course on it.
Yeah, yeah.
And then when everyone starts to do that, it all of a sudden looks very tired and stops working as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I've always been trying to figure out what works, but also in the sense of what's ethical and organic and sustainable.
Yeah.
As well. And yeah, I've lost a few friends over some material that I've written in the past on ethics in marketing.
Well, I'm with you all the way. I mean, I've been a student of Ken since I first encountered him in 2002, I think it was. And apart from the fact that his information is rock solid and it's continuously been at the cutting edge in a field that's expanding this way, he operates with integrity, and very sadly, this is a rare commodity in the so-called, business education community. And I'd say the same thing goes for the other person that I've been a student of since I first saw him at one of Ken's seminars in 2003, which is Perry Marshall. Once again, he's somebody who keeps at the cutting edge. I mean, he's an incredible polymath in areas ostensibly nothing to do with business at all. He's a philosopher, he's a scientist. But again, the whole point is he operates with integrity. And what both of them are up to doing is they're supporting people in creating their own unique business, or in optimizing, in the best sense of that word, a business that is already their own thing, you know. Yeah. And that's what I'm very excited about with your book, because it starts off with what you call your one thing, and how you articulate that, how you create it, and that has got to be the starting point and the foundation for what you do. And
yeah. It's really hard. It's hard when you're a polymath, or you've got, you know, lots of interests in different areas. But Perry certainly manages to pull that off. I mean, Perry and Ken are two, you know, absolute geniuses. There's no question about that. You know, Perry's book Evolution 2.0, utterly mind blowing for me, and his 80/20 sales and marketing as well. You know, both things that, you know, are now part of me just having read them. So yeah, the importance of the one thing is a real eye opener, and I think, you know, again, as I wrote the book, that the primary importance of this one thing kept actually being reinforced for me. So so yeah, the principle is that you want to create a category of one for yourself. You want to put yourself in a category of one. So instead of saying I am an internet marketer, or I am a web designer, or I am a whatever, which defines you by your role, what you want to do is you create a like, it's almost like a happening. You create a brand that is instantly yours. You know, like you know, I'm thinking Start with Whys. It's Simon Sinek. You know, was a book, but and like a course and a movement, or the 4-Hour Work Week with Tim Ferriss I mentioned in the book. You know, Tim Ferriss is the 4-Hour Work Week guy. You know, 3 words, 4-Hour Work Week, and nobody else can ever touch that. Nobody else can ever call themselves the 4-Hour Work Week guy. So what Tim created it wasn't just a book, it was a novel concept, which he instantly owned, because he dreamt it into existence, spoke it into existence with the power of word, right? And that's what I recommend people to do. And very often and you can, everything that you're about can inform this one thing, but the importance of making it really sharp, really focused is critical. And so that you can explain it to somebody. So the 4-Hour Work Week works brilliantly because it does what it says on the tin. You know, the title of the thing says you can get through life perfectly happily working 4 hours a week. Okay? Yep. That's the promise of the thing. So, you know, if you are in the market for that, and that's going to be of interest to you, then that title alone will pique your interest and you'll want to know more, you know? Yeah. So then I should also mention the title of the book. It's Expert Liberation. So, you know, the purpose of this is to say, okay, so the promise of expert liberation. So I'm setting out to be the expert liberation guy. You know, that's how I choose to be known. And what's interesting is that nobody's ever going to, you know, come up and pin these badges on you. You know, you have to declare it yourself. Yeah. Which is interesting. I love the psychology of this, and it's like it's like stepping into your one thing should be. If you feel like you're bluffing it, then it's never going to work. Because if you have to fool yourself, you have to fool everyone else. I'm not saying fake it till you make it, what I am saying is that there should be a kind of attention. There should be, wow, this is thrilling, exciting, and a bit scary.
Yeah.
And I believe that I can be this person.
Yeah.
You don't have to believe that you are that expert, 100% in order to start, but you have to believe that you can. And if you believe that you can, then you can. Like Henry Ford is famously said, if you believe you can or believe you can't, you're correct,
Yeah.
So the book's all about how to, in fact, I devote it's divided into 4 phases. And the first one is all about defining that one thing, because it's so critically important.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go on to, how to select what you're going to sell and then take it to market and grow the business over time. There's something about the one thing. The idea of expert liberation is that in doing that, if you follow that process, that you can potentially get out of the world of work, which I describe as, if you're employed, then, like you started saying, Derek, at the beginning, the promise used to be you go through the system, you get a degree, you get a job, and that is pretty much a career for life, and then you can expect a pension at the end of it, and all of that's out the window. And especially now, people are sitting at home thinking, I don't even know if I'm going to have a job to go back to when this is over. Is my employer still going to be there?
Well, the thing is, I think, I don't want to sound like a boring old fart going, it was all great in the old days and everything's been going to the dogs. But the lot of the average, even manual worker, much less middle class worker, has deteriorated so much in real terms since the time when I started working. I mean,
for sure. I mean, I don't know how anyone can afford to buy a house these days.
No, exactly. And I mean, people expected to do it. I mean, the average, it was almost universal that if you had a white collar, reasonably respectable job, it was a 35-hour week. I mean, it was 9 to 5 or 9:30 to 5:30 with a solid hour for lunch in the middle, and tea breaks where basically people down tools and chatted both in the middle of the morning and the middle of the afternoon. So it was probably more like a 32-hour week. And, unless there was something really crucial going on. I mean, those first 2 jobs I had were with a stockbroking firm. The first one, I was part of the development team, developing the very first share price quotation system, which was totally cutting edge. Apart from the inconveniences of the way you had to develop software in those days, it was a really exciting, intellectually challenging job. And we were treated incredibly well. We were paid well over the odds. We had huge bonuses twice a year. We had informal flexi time. If you did have to work late into the night or through the night to meet some deadline or weather some crisis, it was entirely expected that you'd take a day or 2 off in comparison. Whereas, of course, nowadays in that kind of environment, people are expected as a matter of routine to work virtually every hour they're awake.
With one person working in a white collar job like that, you could reasonably expect to run a household, mortgage, pay your bills, own a car. And nowadays we've got an awful lot of families where both parents work and sometimes working more than one job just to cover the bills. So it has definitely, I agree with you 100%. I think the lot of working people has deteriorated during my lifetime.
And that's before you get to the underclass who are on 0-hour contracts and all the rest of it.
And this current crisis is showing the fragility of the economy and the fragility of businesses, many of which are, because interest rates are so low, a lot of businesses are borrowed up to the hilt.
Yes.
No, just to, they're kind of, yeah, taken too much capital from elsewhere, and not really running on a healthy keel, on the assumption that, well, every month we can carry on the same. We can just keep growing and keep ploughing everything back in. And it's just, this has just shown that, it is actually very much a house of cards. So a lot of people are going to be stressed out. A lot of people are going to be worrying about, I think, the long-term prospects as well.
Yeah.
So the premise of expert liberation is that you can create a business of your own, that where you are the boss, you are the master of your own time.
Yeah.
Which I think is really important. Like you say, if you're tired, you should be able to take a day off and sit in the sunshine and put your feet up, or and soak in the bath or have a sleep, or whatever you want to do.
Yeah. I mean, it's astounding. The one of the ways I've put it recently is that the technology that was supposed to liberate us has in fact enslaved us, which is very ironic, because Bertrand Russell in the 1920s, John Maynard Keynes in the 1930s. There was a book I had in the 1970s called The Mighty Micro about the development of the microprocessor. And they all said that the 20-hour work week was coming, that automation would enable us to all live comfortable, prosperous lives. And it should have done. I mean, to take one example, one of the areas that I operate in is the design of electronic circuits. Back when I was doing that in the late 70s, in order to create a printed circuit board, somebody needed to manually position everything and draw the connections and then make up a template using bits of letraset for the integrated circuit pads and bits of black tape for the copper tracks, and then get this photographed, and then that would be made into a circuit board. And if you wanted, a really top of the line circuit board which had what they call a solder mask, so that only the places where you wanted it to be soldered is connected, and where you had what they call a silk screen on the top to identify where all the components go to make it easy to do. Each of that had to be a separate task done by a highly skilled draftsman, as well as making the actual tracks for the boards, and also drawing out the schematic. I mean, I never drew out a high quality schematic that you could publish and put in a manual. I always sketched them out on pieces of paper and then handed them to a draftsman. So to produce one circuit board, on top of the time the engineer took designing it, it would take literally probably several weeks of assorted, skilled draftsmen. Whereas now you can do that entire thing on a computer and get all of those layers fall out of it automatically. And also, the other thing is it double checks it, and the same thing has happened through all aspects of life. I mean, in the length of time that from when you left university to now, you can see what it took to do graphics work or typesetting or any of these things, and the number of processes and the complications. The actual amount of work has shrunk, and instead of that coming out into general prosperity, it's pushed more and more people into unemployment and given the people who want to exploit the people who are working for them more and more leverage.
Yeah, so there's no other way of looking at it really, other than it's the bosses who are benefiting from the obvious increased efficiency and productivity that the technology gives us. It's not helping the the average working person, of course. Now, but now you can have a £1,000 touchscreen phone in your pocket as well.
Yeah.
That you pay for. And what's possible now with the internet and then with mobile internet, and it's just unthinkable. I remember back in 94, 95, just dreaming of the possibility of being able to work remotely outdoors, with a computer, and now you can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so fascinating stuff. So it really does feel like, there's a book called Risky is the New Safe. That it does feel like it's the world of work has flipped over, and now if you are employed, if you're in a job, it's basically like being self-employed with only one client.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if you lose that client, if you upset your boss or whatever, or they go bust, or they have to make efficiencies, or whatever, then you can find yourself, your entire income is gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whereas so what I'm arguing is that for those of us who have an area of expertise and have a passion, and where you can help other people and serve them by sharing your knowledge, I argue that is now a preferable and in fact safer way to go through life. And I love the idea of just then professionally being your passion, which I think is great. Because the other thing about work as well, I'd be interested to bounce this one off you. Something I put in the book is that there's this idea that when you're employed, that your employer will always tend to pay you as little as they can get away with paying you.
Yeah.
So that they know that they're going to make a profit off each and every hour that you are there at work, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise, well, I mean, that's the free market, isn't it? If they can find someone who'll do the same job for less, they'll do it.
Yeah.
So it's like a race to the bottom for wages. And every hour that you're there, you are creating value, and you're probably not exercising your best skills all the time, using your full experience and your full intellect all the time.
No, definitely not.
Whereas when you have your own business, and you are then free to research, to explore, to make the connections, and this is what I love. So I've kind of got this vision of like a new economy, an information economy, where so many more of us are teaching each other, and sharing with each other and supporting each other in these membership groups and everything else.
Well, this is one of the key things in Perry's Evolution 2.0, isn't it? It's that this metaphor of life as a struggle for domination, which has been pushed as the lesson of Darwin's theory and applied to human society, is in fact a totally misapprehension of the way that nature works in reality. Because although, yes, more of every creature are born than are going to survive and breed, and so it's harsh in that sense, the real driving force is 90% cooperation or 95% cooperation versus 10% struggle for domination.
Yeah, and the other thing about nature is that it works in these beautiful cycles of complexity. So it tends to increase in complexity over time. And something else is that one other difference between, I love looking at nature. I will always turn to nature and biomimicry for guidance, because nature is just beautifully tuned. It keeps creating life, and it keeps enhancing life. And I think one of the things about a lot of marketing these days is that it's kind of anti-nature, in that when you've got like a flower, so we've got bluebells and flowers coming up in the garden right now. The flowers give off their colour, they give off their scent, they release their pollen, and they don't charge a fee for doing that. That's just what a flower does, you know.
Yeah.
When you are a flower, you give it out to the world, and you trust that the pollinators will come along and the seeds will germinate and whatever. But you don't charge a transaction for that. It's not a quid pro quo deal. And I think that I use that as inspiration in marketing as well, is that, you know, each of us should be out there, just express your passion and express how you can help people, express how you can serve others, you know. And that's what we're doing now, you know, for having this call, which will then publish online. It will be there forever, hopefully. And then people who will be able to come along and they'll find it, and if they're interested, they can find out more, you know? But if you are stingy and mean with your knowledge, which is tempting to do, and it's kind of understandable, but I've argued for years, and I think I put this in every book that I've written, is that it's a fallacy to think that if, you know, that there's this natural fear, or if I go out there into the world and I tell everybody what I know, then the people will just take that knowledge and for free and go off and run with it. Yeah. And then I won't get any business. But in fact, the reverse is
absolutely.
Truer.
Absolutely. Yeah. I just wanted to say a little bit more about this idea of my one, you know, your one thing. And I mean, the interesting thing about this book is I was really excited when you gave me the copy to review. And as I told you, I kind of devoured it overnight. And I've read it again since, and I'll be reading it again, and I'll be applying it. Now, obviously, in terms of information, almost everything in that book I already had, because I've been through very parallel experiences, but it was still very valuable. And one of the things in particular, I had in fact created for the business I have been doing up until now, and for the one before that, a kind of encapsulation of who I am and what results I produce already, but I hadn't done it for what I'm putting my main attention on to right now. Oh, and the other thing, you know, like I said, it really resonated with me, the things that you said about various times when you had opportunities and you'd let them slip through your fingers. And, you know, that was so much the case. I mean, you know, one example is that back in 1975, when I finally finished my last job and I set up my own business, what I was doing at that point, we created something whereby I would set up a business developing equipment for rock stars, and we would run it from the warehouse where Yes stored all their equipment and built their stage sets, which was also a kind of social hub for the others. So I designed equipment for Alan White and Steve Howe and Rick Wakeman and Chris Squire, John Anderson, and then for several other bands, including Brian May, the Queen. And when I mentioned this to some musicians, they said, "Well, man, you should have made $1 million." And of course, I should have done, you know, if I'd kind of leveraged that. And there were many others, but between about 2002 and up to 2016, I was doing various things, educating people who are either starting up in business or running, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 man businesses, teaching the kind of things that we've been talking about and that we've learned from the likes of Ken and Perry. I never really got it to fire up because it's a very crowded market. As we've said, it's full of charlatans, and it's difficult to stand out from the noise, and it's difficult also to avoid being tarred with the same brush. But my statement for that was, I empower my clients to create enterprises that express who they are and what they stand for, and that give them the freedom and resources to live a life they love. Which, you know, I get is what you're up to.
Absolutely.
now.
But isn't it interesting as well that one of the vital things, if you are going to be able to jump on these opportunities when they arrive,
Yeah.
right, then that requires that you have a certain amount of free space in your life and in your week.
Yeah.
Whether it's, it'd be good to have some savings but more than that, to have time and to have control over your time. Because if you're working 50 hours a week in a job, and you need to keep doing that because you need to pay the bills, and the bills come every month, and the paycheck comes every month, then you've got no freedom of movement in that.
Yeah.
But so, it's why I argue for people to start building your own brand around your expertise, which you can do in just a few hours a week. We've all got spare time. So, if you like sell your PlayStation, I've got rid of my, I don't have a gaming console in the house now, because I used to spend an hour and a half every day just on a racing game, and I thought, this isn't taking me forward. So, but what I love now is that actually the thinking about my business, thinking about the output, the content I want to create, or the network that I want to build, and having conversations like this, it's as much of a game in a way as other kinds of distractions. It's fun.
Yeah.
It's fun, and it's rewarding, and it's interesting, and it's a challenge, and it's it's never the same twice. So this is now my entertainment as well as my building my future business.
Yeah.
Also, and I've given myself. So what I've got in my own mind is I want to have a big party, my 50th birthday. So I've got 2.5 years now for my big retirement party, and giving myself 2.5 years is really interesting because it takes the pressure off, as well.
Well, if you want a firework display, I'm your man. That's another one of my businesses.
You've got, man of many talents. Eh? So you've created the control systems for fireworks as well.
Well, I built my own control system. It's not at all sophisticated. It's essentially very crude. It's just a bunch of switches with circuits that fire electrical igniters, and then each igniter will set up a mixture of things that are fused to go off simultaneously, and delay fuses which set up another. So there's a whole sequence. So in a typical show you might have between 20 and 30 firing points, and if you're doing it to music, you can synchronize that. You can design the show to the music, and you can synchronize it. I've even done it with live symphony orchestras at Kenwood Park, with 3,000 people in the audience. I mean, regardless of whether you've got a highly sophisticated, automated, computerized timing, which of course you still got to have some sort of manual intervention if you're doing it to a live one. If you're doing it to a recorded one, you can do it. But if you've designed it to a recorded one, you've got to adjust it to the speed that the conductor actually plays it when you're doing it. But regardless of that, the artistry there is in, knowing how to orchestrate and to create the patterns, and what the different kinds of pyro will do, and how to have a sort of dynamic ebb and flow to it.
It's fascinating, isn't it, though, when you find people like yourself who've got such broad interests.
Yeah.
I think very much often the challenge is to say, okay, well, look, how can I build one business around all of this? Because for me, I mean, one of the lessons that I've learned is that spinning multiple plates or trying to do many things at the same time is not the path to success. No. Finding this one thing that draws on all of those interests, that's a challenge.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a case of just picking something that's that you can do in a unique way.
Yeah.
And obviously letting go of other pursuits is sometimes necessary, I think, as well. So yeah, this is what I really want to say to anyone who's sitting at home thinking, the world is suddenly, at least on an economic level, is suddenly a lot less concrete and safe than we all thought it was. And the economic impact on the world is going to be enormous from even just 6 weeks of shutdown. Never mind if it goes on for 6 months.
Yeah.
The number of small businesses that go up beneath the waves is going to be amazing, and I think larger ones as well. I think larger ones are very often oversubscribed, and
yeah, I've obviously been thinking a great deal about this over the last few weeks. But one of the things that surely must have a lot of people going, hang on a minute. For the last 7 or 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, we've been told, oh, we can't afford all of these things that we used to take for granted, and yet supposedly we've had all this economic growth, and yet we still can't afford it. And then all of a sudden, the Federal Reserve can conjure $2 trillion out of nowhere, most of which is not going to get to the average people who are most afflicted. And there's similar kind of conversations here in the UK too. And one of the things that I've been giving a lot of thought to anyway, and which is part and parcel of the book that I'm now in the process of writing, and I'm going to be publishing piece by piece as individual essays. But one of the threads is what actually is wealth and what actually is money. And the first thing is that they are two completely distinct things. And there is so much confusion about that most people, actually cannot get a fix on it. And at the end of the day, some wealth will have been destroyed by all of this economic disruption, but actually not very much. Actually, there will be the same amount of stuff in the world. There will be the same amount of ideas in the world. Some of it will have been transferred from some people to others. But it's interesting that at one point in your book you had the diagram of Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, and I did when I was in my business education phase, I put on a seminar at one point, and I ran a 12-month course with 5 seminars at 3-month intervals and support systems for going between them. I mean, both of them, that was another lost opportunity, really, because, I had a crisis of confidence both times. I thought, oh, I haven't been nearly good enough, and I look terrible on the video, and I sound terrible on the recording, and I and I kind of let it go. And I keep finding people who went to one or other of those, and they say how great it was, and it was a turning point in their life, and all that kind of thing. Yeah. So, but in both of those, I actually used Maslow's hierarchy of human needs from 2 perspectives. One of them is, to look at your own life and go, well, which of these needs have I met, and how far up the scale have I got, and what do I need to meet the higher needs? And also to look at it from your potential customers or clients' perspective and say, what do they need? Where are they? And how does it relate to these fundamentals that are absolutely, perennial and evergreen? And what I've come down to is that what wealth is it's things people want. And they want them because they meet those needs. They either meet the need for survival, for air and clean water and wholesome food, for the need for safety, for the need for self-esteem, and so on. And that is wealth. And what money is a set of tokens that you can exchange for wealth.
Mm.
And if suddenly you create more tokens, but you haven't changed the amount of wealth, or as in the case of the current crisis, you've actually diminished the amount of wealth, or at least the amount of wealth transactions that are happening in any given week, it cannot do anything but debase money. And however many examples you look at, whether you look at Zimbabwe or Yugoslavia or Germany in the 1920s, the lesson doesn't seem to have been learned.
Yeah. And for me, I think on an individual level, I wrote a book a few years ago called How to Be Rich Today, which is, one of those key steps along. When I look back, things start to make sense. But the point of How to Be Rich Today was that that true wealth for me as an individual is about time, not about money, because time is the one irreplaceable resource.
Absolutely.
If you lose a day,
you're never going to get it back.
You can't ever get it back, but you can lose a fortune, you can lose your business, you can lose a house, it can burn down. All these things can be rebuilt, but time that's lost, it can never be recovered. So, that I think should be the focus of everything. There's what's the point of working your fingers to the bone until retirement, and then, so that you can start enjoying life. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, there's a great book. Is it called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying by Bronnie Ware, who's an Australian palliative nurse. And she's spent so much time with people at the ends of their lives. And she's, correlated, brought this all together into a book. And, no one gets to the end of their life going, oh, I wish I'd worked harder. Mm-hmm. I wish I'd done more and built more businesses and stuff like that. No, it's all about time. Mm-hmm. And no employer is ever going to turn around and say, you look tired. Why don't you work a bit less? We are the only people who can take that for ourselves. So, that's what I want to say to people is, you cannot wait for life or the economic system or whatever to suddenly to start putting your needs first. It's never going to happen. Just accept, the system is the way it is. It's set up the way it is. So if you're going to make a change, you have to step up and, be your own master. And that starts with, baby steps of self-mastery.
Yeah.
And I hope that the Expert Liberation book can go some way to, to help that.
And it's not just a book, it's also like a workbook and an audio book. So if people are more comfortable reading than listening than reading, they can access it that way. And there is actually a whole structure that you take people through. And so
it's not like a roadmap as such. I'd love to be able to say that it's a simple roadmap to success and freedom. What it is more like a methodology for creating your own roadmap to freedom.
Absolutely, great. And both you and I probably spent thousands on business education one way and another. So at this point in time, how do people get it, and what is it going to set them back?
Okay, well, you go along to expertliberation.com. Mm-hmm. At the moment, I've got a launch price on this. It's $29, but it's $19 currently, which is about £14-15 in British money. And for that, you get the ebook, which is in PDF and Mobi and EPUB formats. And I've recorded an audiobook version that's up there now. And also you get 12 months access to the private members area, where I'll be putting up interviews and other videos and examples and case studies to enrich the process and to, help you take advantage of other people's experience to inform your own and to get some, I think, give you confidence that this stuff works and, that it works for other people and you're not alone.
Right.
So that's it. So yeah, I mean, I've loved the process of doing it, and it's as challenging and thrilling for me to go into this process as everyone else. So we're all doing
Yeah,
it together.
yeah. Well, one of the things I realised is that I hadn't actually articulated that statement of who I am and what I'm creating for the project, which is getting most of my attention at the moment. Which, as I started writing a book several years ago, then I put it to one side because I only had bandwidth enough for one project, and I was putting it all into the electronics, which has been, modestly successful. There's a bunch of musicians that have got them. Everybody who says they says they like it. I've got a couple of really top level record producers who have them and use them in their studios. It's been used on the latest album by Lee Scratch Perry, which features Brian Eno. So it's been worthwhile. But as I say, I put that to one side at the moment. My focus has gone back to the book. At the beginning of 2020, I decided to slightly change the focus of the book, and it's going to be called The World in 2100, What Might Be Possible for Humanity. And so I articulated what I'm up to with that. Is I say, I empower my readers to contribute to the vision of a peaceful, prosperous, sustainable global society. Because I really feel this is something that some of us have been attempting to bring about since the early 70s. And there was enormous pushback from people who hold the reins of power in this world and who think they have a vested interest in preventing the kind of shifts that were being mooted. And it's been stalled and set back. And this is the last decade we have to make the choice really between functionality and prosperity and peace and a return to some form of barbarism.
Yeah, it definitely feels like we're on the brink of some massive changes, and we're going through, a real shock period, I think, for humanity right now.
Well, there was going to be a shock of one sort or another. I didn't at all expect it to take this form. And obviously, in some ways, the restrictions that have been put in place and the potential for, authoritarian control is potentially a setback for any kind of human progress. But I think that the wheel's still in spin. Nobody can tell how way these are going to go. It has been capable of going in either direction, and it's looking like the negative ones have been making the running with increasing, I would say, desperation.
Are you one of these that were saying that a global economic collapse was imminent and unavoidable?
I have certainly been saying that a collapse of the financial system was unavoidable. I mean, are you asking, when you say the economic system, are you talking about economy in the sense of what the word means, i.e. householding and generation of wealth? Or are you talking about the structure of pounds and dollars and euros and banking?
Yeah, I think that the fiat banking system is seems to, in many ways, have just been on a trajectory to eventual implosion.
Yeah.
Could we go back to a gold-backed currency, for example?
Well, my personal view on that is that we will have, assuming that we don't just go back to feudalism or to the Stone Age or something, which is entirely possible, but assuming that we don't do that and we have a functioning technological society by the latter half of this century, it will not resemble the one that we have at the moment. And there will be something in the way of money. And I think there will be one currency for the entire globe, because it makes no sense. And it will be stable. It won't be eroding its value continually, the way that all of the currencies in the world now are. Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the essays I've written is actually on this topic. It's on Medium, and it's called.
Is it the greatest counterfeiting operation in history?
The greatest you're right. Thank you.
I've read it. I just typed it into my address bar, and it's pulled it up as a suggestion. Yeah. Right,
good. Well, that's nice to know. And thanks for being more on the ball with remembering my articles than I am. It is actually about that, yeah. It's about, the mere fact that we had a system globally that was more or less functional between 1945 and 1971, I think it was, when Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. But because everything depended on all the other currencies were quoted in terms of dollars, it meant he took the entire world system off the gold standard. And so there is no anchor.
Yeah.
But obviously, I think we've got the material for 2 or 3 other hour-long conversations. I've really enjoyed this, and
yeah, me too. Though, whatever happens, the world's not going to be quite the same again when we come out the other side of this. But at least each of us individually should be taking responsibility for our own futures. One thing we've learned, I hope, is that you can't rely on governments and jobs and everything else to provide for you and to look after your best interests all the time. We're all doing our best, and I hope that. Well, I think one of my hopes, really, Derek, is that people who've been stuck at home for a few weeks, that it does make you kind of reevaluate what's really important.
Absolutely.
And it's not. It's not all the things that we were necessarily chasing before, but
100%. Yeah,
much
I think obviously there's 2 polarities of ways that people might react to the current situation, and one of them is a retreat into selfishness and aggression and hostility and separation, and the other is to recognize a more fundamental truth about what it is to be human, and there is a great deal of that going on.
Yeah, awesome, great. Well, I look forward to our next conversation as well, which and then we'll know slightly more then.
Yeah, well, it's really great to talk to you, and I think it's been long overdue anyway. I can't believe it's 10 years since we were having that meal in New York. Yeah.
Well, so many great things have come out of this, but you're right. It's I think what we're both talking about is a culture of mutual edification rather than competition.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, that's the way to go. Right. Thank you so much for having me on, Derek. And
my pleasure.
Look forward to, our next meeting.
Okay. Me too. Bye-bye.
Bye.